And live in 5, 4. Hi, welcome to the Civic Works Committee meeting, July 31st, 2017. It's a beautiful day, and we're ready to get started. I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll look to my colleagues for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I would like to declare a pecuniary interest on item number 8, as I own property in the affected area, and I have consulted with the Integrity Commissioner on that matter.
Thank you very much. So we are a little short in our committee today. We've got 3 members, and if Councillor Ridley declares an interest, a pecuniary interest on that item, we'll just have to pass that on to council. So, that said, let's look at our consent items. There's 5 items here, and I'll look to my committee to see what items they might like to pull. Okay, so, all right, then I'll ask the clerk to make, prepare a motion to pass consent items 2 through 6, and I'll go to my colleagues for their comments.
Thank you. For item number 5, the Corporate Energy Management Program update, I just had a question, and I hadn't thought of asking it before I saw this, and I maybe should have. I often come into the office on Sunday nights, and if I use the facilities here, everything is hot. So I wonder why, the toilet handle is hot, so there's hot water in the pipes. If someone could help me to understand that, is that because the facilities aren't being used? Or is there an engineering explanation for that?
Through the chair, if I may, I'd like to pass it to Mr. Tim Wellhauser, who's with us. Oh, there you are.
Thank you, and through the chair. This is a rather old building. We don't have a lot of building automation controls on this site. If this was a new modern building, we do have setbacks on heating and cooling in the building. We do have that ability. But for the hot water system, that would be a real challenge for us to have that toned down on after hours, such as weekends or at night. One thing we'd like to do through the modernization of this building when it does happen is that very item, is to look at those items.
And so do you think that the fact that it would heat up, I don't know if it's residual heat from the hot water pipes beside it that are heating the cold water, or is that actually an expense that we're incurring because it's heating up, or is it just kind of a, do you know what I mean, like a residual from the other?
Through the chair, that would be definitely residual heat through the pipe in the building because the water is just sitting in there.
Okay, thank you. Well, since you brought up this item, I have a couple questions from the chair. Perhaps I'll ask. Mr. Wellhauser, you mentioned automation, and I noticed that in our ongoing energy conservation projects, we've got a plan to do the automation for Centennial Hall building, and that would save us 25 megawatt hours. Perhaps I could ask you to just describe to us what happens in a project like that.
Through the chair, I'm going to ask my corporate energy manager, Steve McDonald, to speak to that issue.
Thank you, through the chair. Centennial Hall had previously been controlled on a pneumatic system, so it was all manual set points that were set by operators. It has now been converted over on the main systems to direct digital control. So the main valves would be electronic modulation. The terminal units, like example, the terminal units in your offices here would still have some local control. So those ones at Centennial Hall were kept on the local pneumatic control, just for like say a washroom or a small space. But the main air handlers are now able to be scheduled for event mode. Previously, part of the operation was anticipating an event was coming up. Then the operators have to manually tweak up and down until they hit a sweet spot where it would actually operate. Where now the direct digital controls will do that modulation automatically. So they can just schedule the event knowing that it needs to be at occupied set points with whatever the tenant's criteria is at a certain point, and it meets those ready to go when the event begins, and then it goes back to setback modes when it's and so.
Thank you very much. A couple other questions regarding this report. The 2.2 was limitations of measurements, and it says that in our greenhouse gas emissions doesn't include the leased office space. I'm just wondering what % of our office space do we lease?
Mr. Chair, that's a number I don't have. I could easily contact Bill Warner and have that available for you for the for council, but it's something I don't have right now.
All right, so we could get that. Might be interesting. The last one, we've got our targets based on 2014, but I'm also wondering if there's an accommodation for growth. For instance, we're going to be growing a bit, certainly in the engineering department, because we're bringing on a great number of staff for the shift project. So if the city's expanding, then meeting that same 2014 goal will be a little harder. Is there something in the calculations to accommodate for that?
Mr. Chair, when we developed the estimates back in 2014 as part of the plan that came forward for committee and council's approval, we didn't have complete information with respect to some big projects such as that. But when we look at the targets that were set and approved, there is room to work within those existing targets, because in some areas of the city, things are changing on a regular basis. What you actually see in the report, and it's almost the midpoint of this particular plan, we're well ahead on all of our targets, and very, very pleased on that, because the ones both financial and environmental, we're at the point where you'd expect numbers at about the 50% range. We're at 60 to 70% on some of our targets, and in fact on greenhouse gas savings, we've actually surpassed the target. And that's really, really good news. And financially, when we looked at what was referred to as our business as usual, if in fact back in 2014, council chose not to do certain things, and you establish a trajectory into the future, right now we'd be spending in the order of probably about $6 million more per year. So you can really see the cost avoidance by the work of not only folks in environmental engineering services, but facilities division, who lead the charge when it comes to all our buildings. And in fact, you have today a couple people you've already been introduced to, Steve McDonald and Tim Wellhauser and their team. We also have with us Sneha Madur, who works with environmental engineering services. Raise your hand there if you don't mind. She provides direct work with our utilities, water and wastewater, who are very big consumers when it comes to energy. So what you have before you is a plan that is proceeding very, very well, meeting all its targets, in fact, exceeding in most areas right now. But we do have a couple tough years ahead, with some big projects on the horizon. But when we look at how energy is consumed, one strange weather occurrence and the numbers can change. So that's why you have to look at this over a long haul. But as staff, we're very, very pleased with what's being achieved to date. Hard work of many in the corporation.
Well, thank you, and congratulations for a lot of great work. A lot of interesting projects, I notice. Any highlights you'd like to mention?
Well, I think a number of the water and wastewater projects that are either in place now, where we've changed out the energy inefficient blowers and have actually started modernizing those across the city, have turned out really, really well. Then we have, of course, our signature facilities that have come online with changes over the last couple of years, such as the Canada Game Centre, work in arenas, traffic lights, of course, and street lights, some big energy savings there. So all those pieces begin to add up, and of course a program dealing with the culture of conservation. It's up to all the individuals in the corporation to do their part, whether it's small or large. Small is just turning off the lights. Things that should be commonplace, but sometimes people are forgetful, as we also find that in our homes as well too. So I think there's numerous highlights in our particular report that's before you. These reports are public reports, of course, and are online. We know that there's an audience out there that is interested in what the corporation is up to. And in particular, we do have very good working relationships with other businesses in London, and we do share information not only with agency boards and commissions, but also with private industry who look on to see what the city is doing, and vice versa.
That's great, and of course, we're working on that cultural through education. We've had some excellent displays and some award-winning displays out at various events in the city. All right, thank you. I'll go to my colleagues, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I'm just looking at figure 3 in the report, which is talking about the emissions over time. And it looks to me, just eyeballing it, that it's kind of following the trend of phasing out coal in the province. So certainly big changes in terms of where our emissions are coming from. You know, a lot of electricity, we're using a lot of electricity. It's cleaner now, so we're doing better on the emissions front. I'm looking at 2016, and it looks like the fleet is about 40% or something of our total emissions at this point. Like, it's stayed pretty stable and everything else has gone down over time. So what kind of plans do we have? And I guess it's related to number 6, where there's a report saying, you know, the green fleet strategy is a bit delayed. It seems like it's an increasingly important area. I'm not sure how much we can do on the diesel front. Like, I don't know how we're going to power some of those vehicles, if not through diesel, but on the ones that are using gasoline, it seems like there's an opportunity there. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Through the chair, excellent that you highlighted that, because yes, the Green Fleet strategy, we do have one in place right now, but it is being updated. It is part of council's priorities. We'll have our work available later this year. As the city continues to grow, our equipment is getting spread out more and more. It's a large city to serve. So we are having to look now at a variety of ways to optimize fleet services, whether it is reducing not only, as the councillor pointed out, the use of personal vehicles, but at the same time making sure that we're making the right choices when it comes to our modern equipment, and where we can actually make sure that we're using the correct fuels to get those added cost savings and at the same time the greenhouse gas benefit. So fleet is where we're going to be focusing a whole bunch of additional work into 2018 and 2019. As per our plan, but it does represent the sort of the next wave of opportunity, such things as car sharing coming into the city in a bigger way, such as also basically whenever you can actually take a vehicle out of the fleet, often a personal vehicle, not a personal vehicle, a vehicle that's used, your typical car used for building inspector services, where we can actually minimize or car share on those. You can quickly see the cost savings that'll be associated with that. So that'll be our next round of efficiencies in the fleet green strategy report you'll see later this year.
Thank you. Any further comments on the consent items? If not, I see that it's been moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Ridley. So we'll call the question on those.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 3-0.
Our next item is a scheduled item. It's public participation meeting with respect to the changes to the water, wastewater, and stormwater bylaw. So I'll ask if staff has any comments about this, or shall we go directly to the public?
Through the chair, just a brief summary of the proposed change. The current bylaw allows industries that are just charging less than 85% of their water purchase to install a separate sanitary flow meter. That's the criteria that's used to allow industry to be billed based on a wastewater meter. This change would add an additional criteria that would say that that you would also be able to trigger the installation of a meter if you have greater than 50,000 meters cubed per hectare water usage. So that's the proposed change.
Okay, thank you very much. So our goal is to make it a little more attractive here in London for companies that would use a large amount of water. So I guess I've got to go to the committee to ask that we open the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's vote on that.
Motion passed 3-0.
And now I'll look to the public to see if anyone has comments on this new strategy for attracting companies to business. I see no one in the gallery. But so I'll ask once more if anybody's at the door. Right. Okay, so I'll look to committee now for a motion to close the public participation meeting.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 3-0.
Thank you. So we can put that motion on the floor for the change. Once again, moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Ridley. Any comments on that, Councillor Armstrong?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I support this. Anything we can do to encourage and support business and create more jobs in our community obviously is something everyone should support. I just wanted to ask through you to staff, I just want to make sure that this, there's a thing called bonusing. Would that, have we done an analysis on that? Is that something that could, you know, come into play, or somebody could accuse us of that down the road? If that's even applicable here, and I'm not a lawyer and there's none here, but I'll take, you can pretend you're a lawyer for now. Okay, go ahead. Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, we have had legal review it in that context, because that was a similar issue that I wanted to be make sure that we had covered off, and that was not a concern. For us, it's a fairness issue related to some of these very large users, and we think it's appropriate to move forward with this bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that pretty well covers it. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's been moved and seconded. See no further comments. We'll vote on that.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 3-0.
Thank you. Moving on to items for direction, item number 8, I understand that we actually are able to discuss this item. So this was the request that we asked the mayor to sign a petition regarding Ontario Power Generation's proposed nuclear waste repository near the Great Lakes. And we had pushed this off to this date because of a little confusion there. We want to make sure that the public was able to be here for the debate, which may be short. I'll go to Councillor Armstrong for some comments.
Well, I don't have any comments on this, obviously, because I don't even know if we can discuss it if we don't have quorum. So does this get reported to, can it go straight to council, or does it gotta be deferred to another meeting? I'm not sure, so I'll look to the clerks for some advice on how this is to be handled.
Okay, we'll ask the clerks to describe what can happen here.
Well, we have just 2 members that are able to vote due to a disclosure of pecuniary interest. We can still proceed with a recommendation, whatever recommendation is arrived at. We will be down to 2 eligible voters, so there is the potential of a tie vote, which would then put it in the realm of council for discussion. But if the 2 members that are eligible to vote come to an agreement in terms of the recommendation they wish to go forward, that is what would go forward.
Well, Mr. Chair, if you can agree with me, I would like to support this. So I'll move that we endorse, gotta just flip to number 8 to see exactly, endorse the,
It's right up, endorse the mayor executing the letter.
okay, endorse the mayor endorsing the letter that other mayors have endorsed. I'll move that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ridley?
Thank you. I won't speak to the matter, but to the policy. I believe in our policy review, we actually have a policy against endorsing letters from other municipalities and would rather send our own, but I will defer to the clerk's judgment on that.
The letter in question is actually not a resolution of another municipality. It is a letter of an organization that they're asking various municipalities to execute. And so it does not fall within, you're quite right, there is a policy that the council does not automatically endorse resolutions of other councils, that they prefer, of course, to make their own resolutions in that regard. But this is a different circumstance.
Thank you, if I may. I would also point out that we have in the past sent the province a letter regarding this issue from London, and so I might move that we offer the mayor the option of resending that as well. And the last thing I might ask that we put in there, it references a number of reasons why we might want to support or actually suggest that they not go forward with something in the Great Lakes, and perhaps we could include the disaster at Fukushima as another example of why such a policy might prove to be disastrous. So, Councillor Armstrong, if you would agree with that, then I suppose we.
Well, can I hear that first part? Like, I just don't want to complicate the issue because I don't know, I'm not an expert on, I see them as two different issues. Using nuclear energy versus dealing with the waste of nuclear energy. I see them, obviously they're in the same area, but they're kind of a little bit different. So I don't know if you, I mean, I'm okay if it comes down to getting this endorsed, getting the motion passed, but I'm just wondering if they're just two different, slightly different issues, disposing of waste and generating from waste.
Right.
I don't know how you feel about that. I'm certainly willing to hear more comments on that.
Okay, well, that's fine. I think if we have a letter on page 39 of our agenda, which describes, which illustrates the letter that we had sent previously on October 2nd, 2013. So we could also have the mayor resend this letter if that was decided on council. So give the mayor the option of one or both of those. Sure. That would be it. And any comments on Fukushima were, they don't necessarily need to be put in here. It is a different industry. It would be sad to see another similar disaster. Okay, so let's look to see what we have for a motion. While the motion's being up, I will look to Councillor Helmer for some comments.
Well, colleagues, I'm going to wait to see the actual letter. Okay, I see the resolution. So I'm not sure if when it comes to council, I'm actually going to support that. So I've been looking into this project, and I think there's a couple of things that are salient. I haven't actually worked my way through the 4,000 pages yet. I'm a couple hundred pages in, but honestly, it's like a little bit much to take in. But from what I have read so far, a couple points. One is the waste is already being stored on the site. So there's a Western waste management facility at Bruce now, and it's stored in containers now. The difference is like they're above ground. So I'm not really convinced that burying them very far underground is not better than leaving them above ground. You know, one of the difficulties with nuclear power is that it generates waste and you have to do something with that waste. And I'm not sure where the alternatives are for storing it. We have 3 plants that are producing waste that's going to this facility, Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce. So the one facility is already there, and if there's concerns about nuclear power and the potential of environmental catastrophe from the plant malfunctioning and causing a disaster, I mean, that exists whether there's a deep geological repository or not. The other thing that I think is important is that we're talking about low and intermediate level waste. Like this is like gloves that people are using in the plant and things that, like, you know, if it's exposed to relatively low levels of radiation are getting poured. very far underground. And just reading about it, this is in like a sort of surrounded by rock, pretty far away from the lake, frankly. It's like a kilometer away from the lake. I can understand why people are very worried and cautious about the whole idea because it involves a nuclear waste and it's close to such an important resource like Lake Huron. But I'm not sure, having read it, that this is not better than what we're doing now and potentially better than any other alternatives that I've heard, because the waste has to go somewhere. We're talking about 200,000 cubic meters of this low level and intermediate waste. So I just mentioned that to my colleagues. I know that it seems like something we should be against because it's some kind of radioactive material being close to the lake. But are we really talking about taking waste that was produced at Bruce and sending it to some other community to be stored? I don't know how that's any more responsible or ethical than storing it where you're producing it. We're already taking the waste from Pickering and Darlington. I don't know why they're exporting it to us, but I think these are things we need to look at, and I would encourage my colleagues to look at some of the material about the project directly.
Thank you for your comments. One would wonder why we wouldn't simply put it back in the mines where we got it, which are a little more remote from the Great Lakes. Okay, so there's a motion here, and like we have a little more extensive debate on it at council. All right, and perhaps we could just change this slightly to say we're asking the mayor to endorse this or send our own. I suppose we could put an and or in that motion. Okay, we could put an and or, and then we can just give the mayor the discretion to do. Perhaps we'd want to do both of those, or one or the other, and maybe in council we could, based on Councillor Hummer's comments, we might be able to come up at that point with a letter that we could send. So.
I'm happy to move that, and just my final comment. Obviously, this is an issue from the past, issue from the present, and I'm hoping someday won't be an issue in the future. Obviously, we have to, as a country, province, a city, we have to continue to progressively pursue the use of solar energy, because solar energy doesn't create this this kind of waste that we will and have to deal with. We're obviously dealing with it now, and for generations in the future, they're going to have to deal with it. So we need to continue that process of conversion. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that nuclear energy, while right now there are no other options that can provide us with enough power that nuclear energy does, but certainly the focus has to be on solar energy in the future and alternative energies that are not going to have the waste and issues that nuclear energy has. So in any event, I'm happy to move this when it comes up.
Okay, so Councillor Armstrong, you've moved that. I'll second that motion, and we'll call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 2 with 1 recused.
Okay. That moves us on to the 8th report of the Cycling Advisory Committee, which I'll point out they've created some suggestions and have for the County of Middlesex cycling plan, and they are asking our staff to forward those. Those aren't the recommendation of council, but we're just forwarding that on their behalf. I don't know if there's any other comments about this report. Okay, well, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to receive that. And let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 3-0.
All right, our next item is councillor member submission. Councillor Ridley, this is yours. Would you care to speak to that?
I would love to speak to this. I had a concern come up in my ward where we do tree planting on city-owned property that's maintained by people, the residents of the area. So they recognize that city-owned property, but they've also done work such as gardening, beautification, landscaping, and sometimes in-ground sprinklers. So though the city would like to plant trees on there, the residents feel like they need a more comprehensive notification process, including the location, intended location of tree planting, so that they can adequately prepare and move the things that they need to do and enough time to do that. So in this case, we planted 3 trees. We damaged the in-ground sprinkler system, which is on city land, but it's used to help maintain and beautify the property. We've told the residents that we will not be covering the cost of repairing that, and they had no way of knowing where to move things, only that at some point in the future, we're going to plant trees on your property. That was the extent of the notification. So my request to staff is, or of the committee actually, is to direct Civic Administration to develop a bit more comprehensive of a policy. We have to get locates anyway, but making sure that we stake out the location of the new tree planting and give residents adequate time to make any alterations to the property that they're maintaining, which belongs to the City of London, ahead of that planting, so that they can move the sprinkler systems, they can reallocate the gardens appropriately or whatnot. So as the committee support this direction, and I hope that staff is receptive to it. I didn't, it was on the agenda, I didn't have any conversations about it, but I hope it's a pretty straightforward request.
I'll go to staff to see if they have any comments on Councillor Ridley's motion.
Thank you, through the chair. If I might, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the current notification process, and we can speak a bit about what that would entail in terms of a change. So we plant about 5,000 trees annually in London. We do half in the spring and half in the fall. We're just getting ready to do our fall notification, and a card is sent to every home who is going to have planting happen on the city property in front of their house. It provides them till the end of August to let us know if they don't want a tree or if they have questions about the future planting. And then the planting doesn't start occurring until sometime into September, October, finished usually by the 3rd week in November. So we do have a plan in place where people can obtain that information and certainly can also talk to us if they don't wish to have the tree planted. We don't typically survey in the locations specifically in advance, but if that change were to be made, we would have to find a way to accommodate that additional work and how long we'd need to have those stakes out for people to make changes. The best thing people can do when they receive their notice from us, though, is to contact us and we can have the conversation about what we intend to do in front of their property.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. So a couple of questions. We need to get locates done before we dig. So do we have to advise the locate company of the specific locations, or are we just saying on this property we plan to do something and that's where the markings are?
Through the chair, we get the locates done for the property and then the planting is planned alongside the locates. We don't give them a tree location. There's often factors on site that may adjust where that tree needs to go, so we need to have restrictions as to where it cannot.
Okay, so I'll follow up on that. So locates are done and then we do the tree planting based on locates that we can avoid infrastructure. So is there a way to be more clear in the notification process to say, you know, if you need to move a garden, if you have in-ground sprinklers, you need to contact us. I know often I get a lot of things in the mail. I kind of look at what I need, usually the bills, unfortunately, and take the rest of the pile and throw it in the recycling bin. So if I got a card, a glossy card, I might assume it's a landscaping company or something else. So I think somehow if we're doing that generic notification, it needs to be really, really clear to people that we are coming to dig, and unless we hear from you, or if you have concerns, you know, this is gonna happen. I know that the repair costs that my residents are facing are quite extensive and frustrating for them to have a system that they can't use all year and impacting the rest of their landscaping because it's now damaged.
Thank you. Through the chair, we certainly can add content to the notification process to make it clearer, particularly for the people who have invested in landscaping or sprinklers, that we are planning to plant a tree, and they're best to get in touch with us so we can work with them. We love it when a resident wants to be part of a tree planting. It's certainly, we prefer that to an opposition, but agreed, we do get a lot of things in the mail that look a lot like flyers and end up in the blue bins. So I think we're printed and ready to go for fall, but we certainly can have some discussions about content for spring.
I'll just tack on one more. Can we put some notifications out via social media when we send that mail out as well to say, you know, check your mailbox, we're doing some planting, you may have a card in your mailbox with more details.
Through the chair, we absolutely can. It'd be our pleasure.
Thank you. And if I may, just from the chair, ask, are people able to have some input on the kind of tree they might have in their front yard? I know I have preferences.
Through the chair, no, we do not offer that option. It becomes a bit unmanageable given the quantity of trees that we're planting. So we have a list of pre-approved trees that are used in city landscaping, and it will be a tree from that is appropriate to the site conditions.
Mind you, someone could take it on their own to plant a tree, is that correct?
Yes, under bylaw, the resident does have the ability to plant a tree on city property, and our planning department manages that process.
Okay, so there does seem to be quite a few options there. Certainly the option not to have a tree, especially in the case if you have invested as heavily as the residents. So that seems like a very unfortunate situation. Hopefully we can avoid that in the future. So the motion is here. Councillor Ridley, I'll go to you again, but if you'll move that.
Thank you. I'll ask through the chair, the city clerk, review the motion. I don't see anything wrong with that motion which would impact what you're currently doing and the commitments you've made to move forward in the future. So implementing a notification process, we spoke about social media with this one, and you made a commitment to review and update notifications in the future to be a bit more clear. So if it's all the same, I'm happy to move this motion and continue on this process.
Through the chair, we have no concerns from the staff perspective.
Thank you. Okay, so that motion moved by its originator and seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 3-0.
That brings us to deferred matters and additional business. Perhaps I'll go first to colleagues to see what additional business we have. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, I wanted to make inquiries of staff on two different issues. One is to do with bins, garbage bins at condos and townhouses. The second issue I wanted to ask staff about is CNCP, CP going onto the CN rail line. So would we deal with that now or after deferred?
Let's go ahead and deal with those now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just again, Mr. Chair, in my particular ward, I have a large number of townhouses, condominiums. I've raised this issue before. I just want to raise it again because it's an issue in my ward, and I'm wondering if we're making any progress. Do we have any plans on implementing any programs, et cetera? And that's to do with condos and townhouses. Many of my townhouses and condos, they have cement pads. They take their garbage out to these pads. Most do not have fencing around, and the garbage put out there. I like to think they're all put out the day before, but the fact is sometimes it's, people start putting garbage out 2-3 days ahead of time. Not a huge problem, it's just a few people, but, and then quite often I drive by and I see these bags are ripped open because the skunks and other creatures are there. Obviously, if there's skunks and other creatures, you have open bags, it attracts rats, which is a bit of a problem. And of course, then you get the garbage blowing around on the street, and nobody's picking it up. And so I guess the thing is, I'm still trying to understand why wouldn't it make more sense to have a truck pull up with 2 workers there. One gets out and stays there and loads. Sometimes with these complexes, literally, you got an 80-unit complex, a bag or 2 each. It's a lot of bags. So number one, all that physical work, okay, obviously, if you didn't do it manually, it, might reduce injury, gain the time wasted standing there and lugging all those bags into a garbage truck, when a bin a truck could pull up and just lift them up and dump it in minutes. I don't understand why we don't have a system like that. I know there are some places that do use bins, mainly a lot of, I think, the private sector apartment buildings, and I know every building is different. Some have rollout bins, garbage collected internally, then taken out. There's all kinds of combinations, but I'm still seeing a lot of townhouses and condos that are doing it this way, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm just wondering where we're at with that, and what are the obstacles in getting everybody just to put their garbage in a bin and reduce some of the issues.
Okay, so I'll ask staff to maybe discuss that and what we might be able to do to encourage them to have bins.
Through the chair, currently, some complexes are a challenge, as the councillors referred to. We do have a program, though, where bins can be rented in condo environments. We have to work with the property management company because they have to then agree to pay the rental fee, $25 per month. And that, for some, becomes, I think, part of the impediment, that there's an extra fee associated with it. The challenges on some complexes are difficult and require a lot of cooperation from the property management company. We will go on site, meet with the property management company or the superintendent, provide the appropriate information, also deliver when required if they can't find that resource available. But it still requires someone on site to really be the authoritative person to help control the challenges. In some complexes, they're spectacular. There's no issues at all. But we do know that there's a handful of complexes around the city where cooperation has not been achieved. But we're here to work with any of the property owners to find the best solution that meets their needs. And in many cases, it could either be just bags in a certain area, sometimes screening applied, works very well. In other areas, the bins work better. So we've started putting more bins in place for exactly the reason of being able to offer a choice. So I can elaborate further if need be, but we're here to help. But there's some places there that it becomes more difficult. But we do not give up on anyone. We will always do our best to make a solution work.
Well, I hope we'll keep working on that. I know, for an example, I have a corridor of townhouses and condos along Bonaventure, and none of them, I don't think, are using bins. And quite frankly, when people, you get some people putting their garbage out days in advance. And with condos and townhouses, a lot of people don't have garages. The only place they can store garbage is in we'll call it the backyard, the patio. Well, of course, that becomes problematic if you have somebody who's not using due diligence and garbage is out there, and of course, then you're attracting all kinds of rodents and everything, which affects all your neighbors. You got a lot of people living in a small area. So since I know you're out there, the staff is out there trying to encourage this sort of thing, I'll certainly alert those condo owners along that corridor that there is this opportunity. Yeah, $25, but I can tell you, if I was managing one of those properties, I certainly think that's a great investment, you know, for a lot of reasons. Now, of course, if you have 2 or 3 bins necessary in a complex, that could add up to a bit of money then, 2, 3 bins, you know, so maybe there can be some balance there, some opportunity, because I think people would buy in for $25 for a bin, or if there was an opportunity to purchase an affordable bin one-time basis, and then there isn't that monthly charge, because these bins, if they're handled correctly, last for many, many years. So maybe there's other opportunities to look at approaching if that's one of the factors, the costs, ongoing operational costs of the monthly fee. So thank you, staff, for this update on this issue. And if I can, Mr. Chair, go to my second issue.
Certainly, although if you don't mind, maybe I can, just as the chair, ask, what's the cost of a bin?
Mr. Chair, the bins range in and around about $900 to purchase outright. Now, we buy in volume, so we probably get a very good price. If a condo complex bought on their own, it could be upwards of $1,200, $1,300 for a container. They do last, though, 15 to 20 years. The new ones are made of very strong material and they're lightweight. So there's a trade-off. When it comes to, of course, if you buy your own, you're responsible for maintaining it, the wheels, need ongoing lubrication. In the case of our $25 rental fee, we are involved in the maintenance and replacement.
Okay, so we're looking at a 3-year payoff to purchase a bin from the city. Sounds like a pretty good business case. Okay, Councillor, you had another issue.
Just on that point, somewhat like our affordable blue boxes, which can be picked up, I think, for $5 or $6 at some of our depots. I mean, that's, if you go to the store, you can pay $8 to $12 for the identical item. So that's certainly, I know a lot of people have taken advantage of that program, affordable blue boxes, and of course that benefits us again, increases recycling, decreases waste to our dumps. So maybe we can look at that too, as well as trying to offer some type of, even a one-time program to, you know, see if we can get a lot of these condos and townhouses, you know, where they're using bins. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. On the second issue, I was just wondering again, I asked this at council, and I was wondering if I could get a little more information on whether or not we have been in talks with CP and CN. And if so, is there any progress being made in the positive? I know there's no agreement, nothing inked or anything, but are we seeing any willingness to sit down and talk, and how far are we, if you have an update? I did try to get that, but the mayor's not here today, so I'm wondering if our city engineer can give us some understanding where we may be.
Thank you, through the chair. The city manager and I have met with CP, and we have meetings scheduled with CN and CP over the course of the next month. The initial conversations were positive and very amiable, but I think everyone has acknowledged there's a long road ahead. We haven't gotten to, obviously, to any resolution at this point, but we will continue that process, and when we have a little bit more to report, we'll bring something back for the consideration of committee and council.
So what you're saying then is that there seems to be a willingness to meet and talk about it, and nobody's saying, no, don't waste our time, but rather let's try to work together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Through the chair, certainly both railway companies were absolutely willing to come to the table and talk to us. And it's very early days, of course, in that process, but absolutely they're taking our meetings, so that's a good start. And we do have some work to do, but certainly there's been a willingness to come to the table and at least have the conversation.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'd be willing to throw in a few garbage bins free if they were to follow through. Councillor Ridley, I think you had an additional item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. I don't know if staff would be able to answer this or come back with it. But when I was traveling and I was in Quebec City, I noticed something that they're doing for pedestrian safety that we are not. and I wonder if it was something that we had looked at or would consider. So they do a no turning on right, and they do pedestrian-only crossing, including, you know, perpendicular, parallel, and catty corner for a 30-second interval at all of their intersections. So no traffic moves, pedestrians only, and then it reopens to traffic. And I noticed that it made it very walker-friendly or pedestrian-friendly. And so I wondered if that's something that we had looked at in the past or something that we could consider, especially in some of the corridors where we have more pedestrians.
I remember a corner like that at Clarence and King. We used to have a crossing where it stopped and you could, there were walkways diagonally as well. I'll look to staff to comment about that.
Thank you, through the chair. We have actually in the past had those sort of, we called them pedestrian scramble crossings, where there's a pedestrian-only phase at various locations in the downtown. When we're looking at accommodating pedestrian volumes and their signal timing, it would depend on the volume of pedestrians and the demand and directions they're coming from. So we do know that that's a tool in our toolbox. We haven't used it recently, but when we evaluate intersections, it is a tool that we know we do have at our disposal.
I like the name of that, pedestrian scramble crossing. It should be announced, pedestrian scramble. All right. Any other further additional business? No? Then let's move to deferred matters. So any comments about the deferred matters list or issues, questions? All right. Well, I'll entertain a motion for our deferred matters list.
That we continue to have a deferred matters.
Okay, we'll just continue to defer those. Yes, okay. Moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed, 3-0.
That brings us to our end of our meeting. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Ridley. All in favor? Thank you. Have a good afternoon.